Hey friends, tonight we begin with the quiet, gloved, and deeply invisible world of a medieval palace maid, a life lived between golden walls and muddy floors, where the ceilings are carved with angels, but you sleep next to a broom. It's a place of velvet gowns, silver goblets, and the kind of exhaustion that starts before dawn and doesn't let go, not even when you're crying into a rag behind the royal privy. The nobles sparkle. You polish. The queen's dog eats before you do. It's elegance from a distance, brutality up close. And while history remembers the kings, the queens, and the lavish feasts, it conveniently forgets the girl scrubbing wine from the floor while 50 guests pretend she doesn't exist. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these soft, strange corners of forgotten history. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing who's drifting through the night with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe make yourself a cup of something warm, and if you hear a quiet knock at your door in the next few minutes, don't worry. It's probably just someone asking you to iron the Duke's undergarments. Let's begin. You wake up before the roosters, not out of discipline, out of obligation. There's no sunlight yet, just the sound of wooden soles clicking down the servant corridor. A ladle bangs against a copper pot 2 doors down. That's your alarm clock, and it doesn't have a snooze button. You blink once, you're already late. Your bed, if you can call it that, is more straw than mattress, more draft than comfort. A moth flutters above your face. You don't bother swatting it. You've got 7 minutes before the head housemaid checks your hallway. If your feet aren't on the stone by then, you're getting a lecture. Or worse, a shift in the scullery, which is a polite way of saying, hope you enjoy peeling root vegetables next to a sweating butcher for 10 hours straight. So you move. Your bones complain, but no one's listening. Least of all the palace, you slide your feet into cold shoes and lace up your uniform. Rough linen, faded from years of boiling water and bleach. It's the color of forgotten parchment and smells faintly of soap, iron, and your own fatigue. The sleeves are too tight at the elbows, the hem too short to feel modest, and the apron was white 3 rains ago. You splash your face with water from a chipped basin, not because it wakes you up, but because the nobles don't like oily servants. You pinch your cheeks, you tie your hair. You pray your laces don't snap again like yesterday. No breakfast, not yet, not for you. The bread is still rising in the lower ovens, and even when it's ready, you won't be first. First is the Queen's greyhound, then the food taster, then the scribe, then the steward, then the steward's assistant, then the bishop's errand boy, and somewhere after the house cats, if there's still half a crust, maybe it's your lucky morning. You step into the corridor. It's quiet, but not silent. Someone's coughing behind a door. 2 girls whisper about a broken teacup. You pass them without a glance. Eyes forward. Mouth shut. That's the rule. That's always the rule. The castle's stone floors are cold underfoot. They don't warm up until midday, and by then you're too numb to notice. As you walk, you straighten tapestries. You relight candles that died in the draft. You pick up a handkerchief someone dropped, probably a noble's daughter, who'll accuse a maid of theft by lunchtime. You return it to her chamber silently, no thanks, just a look, as if you were the one who left it there in the first place. Your first task of the day, fire duty. You kneel at the hearth in the princess's room. She's not awake yet, but if she stirs and the fire isn't lit, you'll be summoned. Not with words, but with a silver bell you're expected to hear from across the building. The kind of ring that makes your spine stiffen. The kind that means someone is displeased, someone important. So you strike the flint, once, twice, again, the sparks catch, the kindling crackles to life, and just for a moment, the firelight touches your face, makes you look alive. Then you're gone again. You check the linens next. One has a stain. You pray it's wine. You carry it to the washroom and make a note to scrub it with ash and vinegar later. If it doesn't come out, it's your fault. Not the princess's fault for spilling. Your fault for not stopping gravity. Someone hands you a tray of toiletries, perfume bottles, ivory combs, a ribbon with pearls. You carry it as if it's made of glass and judgment. There's no time to breathe, no time to think, just movement, just duty. And through all this, the cleaning, The fetching, the rushing. No one has yet asked if you slept well. No one asks if your back hurts, if your mother is ill, if your eyes sting from the smoke in the lower hall, because you're not a person in this place. You're a pair of hands. You're a quiet shadow. You're the answer to someone else's impatience. You walk past a window. The sun is rising now, gilding the tops of towers, illuminating the city below. It's beautiful, briefly, and completely irrelevant to you. You keep moving, because someone, somewhere, just rang a bell. And even if it wasn't meant for you, you've learned, if no one responds, it always becomes your problem. You're awake, the palace is breathing, the nobles will soon stir, and whether you're ready or not, the day has begun. You eat like a thief, because in many ways you are one, not of gold, not of secrets, but of time, of scraps, of whatever moment you can steal between one chore and the next. You don't have meals, you have seconds. Not the kind that come after firsts. The kind measured by a ticking clock and a supervisor's shadow rounding the corner. The bread today is stale. Of course it is. It always is. You take the end piece, dry, tough, and slightly grey from ash in the air. You chew quickly, not because you're hungry, though you are, but because the sooner you finish, the less likely someone is to take it from you. There's no table for maids, no chairs, no grace before meals. You lean against a wall in the back corridor near the laundry, one arm clutching a dented pewter mug of yesterday's tea. Cold, bitter, perfectly adequate for someone not meant to enjoy it. Conversation? Dangerous. Laughter? Suspicious. Appetite? Unseemly. You eat quietly, eyes down. One ear always listening for footsteps, because if a noble woman wanders past and sees you mid-bite, she might hand you her gloves and expect them scrubbed clean before her next breath, and you will do it. You always do, even if it means hiding your last mouthful in your apron pocket and pretending you were just adjusting the seams. You'll eat it later, maybe, if the mice don't get there first. You tried sitting once, just once, at the edge of a windowsill with your crust and cup, letting the morning sun hit your face for 3 whole minutes. You were scolded, of course. Maids don't lounge, they said, as if 3 minutes with your spine straight was some form of treason. You apologized, you always do. And you stood for the rest of the day with tea dripping down your apron and shame curled tight in your stomach. Today, you eat standing again. Your back aches. Your hands are already raw from lye and scrubbing brushes. But the bread tastes like something, like fuel maybe, or memory. Your mother used to bake loaves every 3rd day. Coarse, yes, but warm. They never lasted long, but they were yours. These days, you eat leftovers from a feast you'll never attend, crusts from a pie you're not allowed to name, crumbs of cheese from a platter that passed you by an hour ago. Still, better than nothing. The cook sometimes takes pity. He'll leave a boiled egg near the pantry for you and the others, not out of kindness, just guilt. Or maybe fear that one day, one of you will collapse with a tray of soup halfway to the Queen's chambers, and the whole illusion of perfection will come tumbling down with it. You crack the egg against the wall, peel it in 3 quick motions. Salt is a luxury. Pepper, a myth. You eat it plain. You swallow without chewing. Time is too tight for savoring. And even now, while you're biting through that last dry mouthful, you hear it. The bell. Not loud, not urgent, just one single ting. But it means someone wants something, which means someone wants you. You glance at the others, the girls who haven't finished their crusts, the one who just poured herself half a ladle of soup. Eyes meet, nobody moves. Then you step forward, because someone has to, and if you don't, the scolding spreads like a disease. One lazy maid spoils the whole batch. You toss the rest of your crust back in the cloth it came in. Maybe you'll get to it later. Maybe not. Maybe the dogs will. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve, smooth your apron, straighten your spine, back to being invisible. You don't burp. You don't sigh. You certainly don't complain. Because meals aren't for enjoyment. They're not even for survival, really. They're just a pause, a comma, a breath between orders. and now it's over. So you walk away from your stolen breakfast, back into the long hallways, back to the duties waiting, and the nobles who forgot you existed the moment you turned your back. You're full? Barely. You're satisfied? Never. But you're moving, and that's all anyone expects from you. You scrub the sacred floors of a palace built for people who never notice what's beneath their feet. Marble. Stone. Carved wood. They glide across them in embroidered slippers. You kneel, back bent, rag in hand, removing yesterday's spilled wine, mud from the Duke's boots, and whatever the dog dragged in, literally. You begin with the west corridor. No sunlight reaches here until late morning, so the wax stays tacky, and the air smells like mildew and lavender, a strange mix of rot and royalty. You kneel, always kneel. There's no broom long enough to save your spine. You wipe, twice, then again, because someone once said they saw a streak. Whether they imagined it or not, doesn't matter. The Queen's cousin slipped once and blamed the floor. You were scolded. The floor wasn't. You moved to the banisters next. Ornate. Curved. Coated in dust that settles faster than praise ever will. You polish with a cloth older than your apprenticeship. It used to be a table napkin. Silk. Once. Now. Just threadbare regret. As you clean, nobles pass you. They don't step around. They glide through. A flick of a cloak, a careless cough, a hem dipped in the bucket you just set down. No apologies. One drops a handkerchief. You stoop, hand it back. She takes it without a glance. You think you muttered, "You're welcome." But even your own voice sounded invisible. The tapestries are next. Tall, heavy, dusty stories no one reads. You swat them gently to release moths, cobwebs, and powdered boredom. Then you brush the base. Not too hard. Last time, someone said the embroidery looked disturbed. Disturbed, as if the fabric had feelings, as if you didn't. Then the fireplaces, black with soot, still warm from the morning fire you lit hours ago. You scrape out the ash with a small metal spade. The soot clings to your fingers, your arms, your collarbone. No one will notice unless you track a speck across the carpet. Then suddenly you matter. And not in a good way. The Queen once found a grey smear on the hem of her gown. 3 maids were punished. Only one of them cried. You weren't involved that time. But you remember the silence. And the slap. You clean the windowsills next. Not the glass, that's for someone taller. Just the ledges, where dead flies and dried flower petals gather like a secret no one wants to talk about. You find a note. Folded. Dropped. Maybe hidden. You don't read it. That's not your job. You dust around it, tuck it farther behind the vase, and pretend you never saw it. Smart maids know when to see and when to be blind. By mid-morning, your knees are numb, your fingers ache, your right wrist clicks when you twist it. You wipe your face with the inside of your elbow. Dirt smears across your cheek like war paint. And yet, no one stops. No one says, "Looks clean in here." No one says, "Thank you for not letting the Duke slip and break his expensive nose." They only notice when something isn't done. A candle left crooked, a rug not aligned, a strange scent near the roses. You cleaned vomit once, noble child, too much candied plum. You used vinegar, thyme, and prayers to scrub it from brocade upholstery. No one mentioned it afterward. No one asked who saved the chaise lounge. But the next week, someone accused you of walking too loudly near the nursery. You smiled. You apologized. You cleaned quieter. There's a spot near the privy where the floor always stays damp. You don't ask why. You just mop. It smells like old secrets. Sometimes, it smells like something worse. You hold your breath. No one will ever ask if you have a sense of smell. They assume you surrendered it at the servant's gate, along with your name and your need to rest. And just when you think you're done, just when you set down the bucket, wring out the cloth, wipe your hands, someone enters the room and says, "This area's already been cleaned, yes?" You nod. They nod back. Then they drop a grape and walk away. And you kneel. Again. Because that's the rule. Clean what's dirty. Clean what's not. Clean what people pretend isn't theirs. And when you're finished, don't expect applause. Don't expect a thank you. Expect another mess. You don't wear perfume. You don't wear lace. But you know exactly where to pin the jewels, how to blend the rouge, and how tight a corset can go before someone faints. Because it's your hands that make someone else beautiful. Not yours. Theirs. The princess is still in bed when you arrive, draped in silk, bathed in early light, like a portrait come to life. You knock once, softly, then enter without waiting. Maids don't wait for permission. Maids arrive. Her eyes are half closed. She won't speak for another 10 minutes. That doesn't stop the work. You draw the curtains. Warmth floods the room. You light the incense. Lavender today. She likes it. You don't. Then you ready the tools. Brushes, powders, pins, wale, bone corset, embroidered stockings, slippers like clouds, the gown that weighs more than your weekly laundry basket. You've done this hundreds of times, but you still hold your breath before the corset. It's not just fabric, it's war. You wrap it around her ribs like armor, lace it up the back with practiced fingers, tug until her breath hitches, then pause, not out of mercy, just calculation. One more pull might break her mood, or her rib, so you let her exhale. Then pull once more. She frowns. Too loose. You nod, tighten again, your fingers sting. She doesn't thank you. Of course she doesn't. Once she's standing, you comb her hair, 100 strokes, slow and even. Her hair is fine, temperamental, prone to tangling. She complains anyway. You nod again. You part it into 3 sections, braid, twist, pin. It looks flawless. She won't notice. She'll glance in the mirror and say something like, tolerable, then ask why your own hair is so flat. You won't answer. You never do. You're not allowed mirrors, by the way. None of the maids are. They say it makes us vain, or distracted, or forgetful of our station. So when you paint her lips, rosewater and crushed beetroot, you look at her reflection while pretending not to crave your own. You've forgotten what you look like, honestly. Sometimes you catch your face in a brass pot or a dark window pane and think, is that me? Then you keep moving. No time to wonder. Wondering is a luxury. She picks between 2 gowns. You already know which one she'll choose. You lay it out anyway, carefully, reverently, like dressing a relic. The fabric is satin, imported. It costs more than you've earned in 3 years. It rustles when she moves, like whispers in a chapel. You slip it over her shoulders, tug it down, fasten every hook. Then you kneel to tie the slippers, brush off the floor dust she'll never notice. When she turns to leave, she catches your eye. You look tired. You almost laugh. Almost. But instead, you bow your head and say, I'll try harder, milady. And she's gone. You gather the powders, the brushes, the pins she flung aside. You fold the gown she didn't choose. You rinse the cloth she blotted her lips with. You pick up the pearl earring she dropped but didn't notice. Everything in this room shines. Everything except you. That's the point, really. Your job is to make someone else sparkle. So brightly that no one ever sees the dull shadow behind them. Adjusting their hem, smoothing their sleeves, holding their breath so they can inhale freely. And here's the strange part. You're good at it. You know what colors flatter what skin tones. You can style hair for 3 types of crown. You can sew a torn seam in 30 seconds flat with a needle and 2 fingers. But no one calls you talented. They call you efficient. Like a clock or a mop. You once painted the Duchess's lips so perfectly, the king stared for a moment too long. The next day, you were reassigned to chamber pots for a week. That's your warning. Never outshine. Never improve too fast. Never let your skills speak louder than your silence. Even if your hands create beauty, they must remain plain. Even if your eyes see elegance, they must stay lowered. So when she steps out, radiant, powdered, poised, and they all gasp and call her enchanting, you watch from behind the door and say nothing, because no one applauds the brush, only the painting. And in this palace, you are never the canvas. You are the hand that disappears the moment the masterpiece enters the room. You are a ghost with errands, a shadow with sore feet, a blur in the corner of someone else's important moment. Your whole day is a relay race where you carry everything but the baton. Requests, trays, whispers, mementos, gloves, letters, scarves, combs, apologies, all passing through your hands, none of them yours. It starts right after dressing the lady. Fetch the embroidery kit. Tell the cook she wants honey, not plum jam. Deliver this ribbon to Lady Briona, but don't let her know who sent it. And if you pass by the chapel, remind the steward that the bishop's chair squeaks. It embarrassed his grace last Sunday. You nod, always nod, never question. You step lightly. The floorboards know your weight. They remember your wrong steps. You once broke the silence of the great hall with a sneeze, and 3 nobles turned around like you'd committed blasphemy. Since then, you've learned to hold your breath while walking past anything expensive. Your shoes are worn to the sole. You slide more than you step. Gliding becomes habit. Your goal is invisibility. You pass through the castle like wind under a door, unnoticed, except when you're late. Late is fatal. Not literally, not always. But it means an eyebrow raised, a sigh, a name remembered in the wrong tone of voice. You run errands for 5 different women and 3 men by noon, none of whom remember your name, only your speed. The head seamstress likes you fast but silent. The queen's cousin wants you cheerful but unmemorable. The footman flirts, but only when no one's watching. You respond with practiced indifference. Because every word, every look, every breath is weighed. You carry a package down 3 flights of stairs, velvet slippers that must arrive before the lady sits for tea. The box is wrapped in paper that crinkles too loudly, so you hold your breath every time you pass a chamber. You deliver it just in time. She opens it, frowns. These are the wrong shade of pink. You bow, apologize, take it back. Not your mistake, still your fault. Back up the stairs, swap them, back down. Again. This time she doesn't even look at you. She looks at her shoes. And you vanish. You're asked to deliver a note to a stable boy. You go. The note smells faintly of perfume. You don't read it, of course you don't, but you imagine the boy's face when he does. He doesn't smile. He gives you a letter in return. You didn't see me. You nod. You never do. Your mouth is dry by now, but there's no time for water. You pass a pitcher in the corridor and wish it could speak. You imagine it saying, "Drink, just for once." But it doesn't. You bring a comb to the Dowager Duchess. She inspects it as if it might bite her. This is bone, not ivory. You take it back. It's ivory. You say nothing. Because speaking is risky. Even truth becomes insolence in the wrong ears. Someone shouts down the hallway. A dropped tray. Not yours. But everyone turns to look. The servant girl stammers. You feel it in your bones. That hush before the punishment. You slip away. You've seen enough shame for one day. You pass a mirror. Not for you, but you see a flicker. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders, the faint outline of a girl running errands for everyone but herself. You adjust your cap. Keep walking. Someone hands you a tray. Tea and cake for the guest in the rose chamber. You carry it like it's holy. Like one crumb out of place might curse the kingdom. You arrive. The guest isn't there. You wait in the hallway, motionless, tray balanced on fingertips. 10 minutes, 15, 20, still standing, still silent. Eventually, someone takes it from you. She changed her mind. Of course she did. By dusk, you've circled the palace 12 times. Up and down servant stairwells, through banquet halls, behind tapestries, beneath balconies. Your feet ache, your legs throb. But your breath? Still even, still quiet. Because no one wants a maid who pants. No one wants to hear the effort it takes to serve them. You've mastered the art of looking like you're gliding while slowly falling apart. So you keep moving. Not because someone told you to, but because someone might, at any moment. And in this place, anticipation is survival. The storm doesn't ask your name before it strikes. It just rains, and you're always standing in the open. In this palace, anger is airborne. It travels faster than orders, louder than bells, more dangerous than spilled wine or misplaced slippers. And it always lands on the lowest branch it can reach. You. Someone wakes up in a foul mood. Because it rained last night? That's your fault. The wind blew the curtains too hard? You must have opened the window wrong. The sun is too hot? Clearly. You dusted the drapes too gently. Too cold? You probably forgot to light the third hearth. Nature is temperamental, but nobility is worse. A dropped fork becomes a scandal. A wrinkle in a sleeve becomes your personal disgrace. A scowl on a royal face? That's a thunderclap. And you, Maid, are the lightning rod. They never yell at each other. Number, that would be impolite. So they yell at you. Softly, sometimes. Cruelly, often. In a tone that makes it sound like you should be apologizing for the war, the taxes, the rats in the cellar, and the fact that the Baron's wine tastes slightly less assertive than last year. You nod, always nod. I'm sorry, milady. I'll see to it, milord. I'll do better next time. Even when it wasn't you. Especially when it wasn't you. Because the higher the voice, the lower the truth. You once watched the royal greyhound tear apart a velvet cushion, a mess of feathers, fabric and fang. You were blamed, of course. Why did you leave it on the chair? You hadn't. The dog had jumped on the table. But what were you supposed to say? No, Your Highness. It was your slobbering, inbred animal? You value your teeth too much for that kind of honesty. So you bowed, gathered the stuffing, stitched in silence. They called you loyal. How sweet. Another time, the nobleman's wife accused you of stealing her gloves. They were inside her own sleeve. She found them 20 minutes later and said nothing. You apologized anyway. That's just protocol. The apologies are not for mistakes. They're for existing in proximity to someone's inconvenience. You absorb moods like a stone soaks rain. No expression, no rebuttal. If someone throws a hairbrush, you dodge. If someone cries and blames you for ruining their morning, you offer a handkerchief, one that you washed, pressed, folded, just this morning. You are the first face someone sees when they're annoyed, and the last one they remember when their fury fades. But the bruises stay with you. Not always literal. Though once, a tray thrown in your direction left a cut along your forearm. The cut healed. The silence didn't. No one asked if you were all right. Because anger, here, flows downward. Always downward. The Duke's contract falls through. He snaps at his steward. The steward fumes at the clerk. The clerk glares at the page. The page mutters at the cook. And the cook finds you reorganizing the spice shelf and demands to know why. The pepper isn't alphabetized. You get yelled at for pepper. You're yelled at for everything. You forgot the pins. You folded the shawl wrong. You curtsied too slow. You curtsied too fast. You took too long to answer the bell. You answered too soon and startled the lady. You stand too still. You look sulky. You stand too straight. You look smug. You look down. Shy. You look up. Disrespectful. There's no right posture when people are looking for something to hate. And when they're not yelling, they sigh. That long, disappointed exhale that says, I can't believe I have to deal with this. When all you did was walk into the room with a comb and a smile, you become afraid of sound. Not loud sounds. Small ones. The soft TSK, the raised eyebrow, the pause in conversation where your name is not mentioned, but heavily implied. You'd almost prefer shouting. At least then, it's over. But the worst part? You start to believe it's your fault. The self-blame seeps in like damp. You replay your steps. Was the towel crooked? Did I fold the letters out of order? Did I make eye contact for half a second too long? You ask no one. You learn that the safest sentence is, I'm sorry. Even safer, silence. By late afternoon, you're no longer angry. Anger takes energy. You can't afford it. You're something worse, numb. And still, you move. Because even in fury, the palace wants perfection. The table must be set. The bed must be turned. The chamber pot must be empty. And the girl who does it all must be quiet. So you are. Until the next storm comes. And once again, you are the lightning rod. Privacy is a myth. Love is a risk. And desire? That's practically treason. You do not own time in this place. You do not own space. You do not own your thoughts, not really, because even your silence is monitored. And your glances? Counted. Your room, if you're lucky enough to have one, is the size of a cupboard, no lock. No door that fully shuts. No corner where secrets can live for more than a minute without someone else's footsteps brushing too close. You share it with two others. They breathe beside you at night like whispers from lives too similar to be strangers, too exhausted to be friends. The beds creak, the air is musty, the walls are thin, you hear everything. So does everyone else, which is why you learn quickly. Do not whisper after dark, do not write letters, do not giggle, and whatever you do not linger near anyone too often. The palace is allergic to affection, it can't control. You once laughed a little too long at the stable boy's joke. It wasn't even a good joke, but it was yours, for half a breath. That night, you were reassigned to the East Wing, no reason given. He was gone the next day. You never saw him again. Just heard, weeks later, that he now mucks stalls for a lord, with fewer rules but more whips. Lesson learned. You are not here to love, you are here to serve. You may witness 1,000 love stories, noble affairs whispered behind fans, secret glances between visiting knights and blushing ladies. Notes passed through you. Deliver this, don't read it, sealed with wax and perfume. You carry their desire in your apron pocket. But your own? Must be buried, must be swallowed, must be broken down into something smaller, like duty, or obedience, or fatigue. You once had feelings. You remember this vaguely. A look, a song, the way your hand brushed someone else's while passing a bowl. But that was before. Now, you avoid eye contact. You flinch when someone says your name gently. You freeze if a hand lingers too close to yours at the washing basin. Because kindness is often a prelude to punishment. And love is dangerous. A maid who falls in love is a maid who forgets her place, who lingers too long in doorways, who smiles too brightly when no one else is watching, who dreams of a life outside these walls. And no one likes a maid with dreams. The older ones warn you. Keep your head down. Keep your heart small. Keep your mouth shut. You do, mostly. Still, some days, you feel it. A pull in the chest. A flicker of something when a guard holds a door longer than necessary. When the kitchen boy leaves an extra fig on your napkin and doesn't say why. You don't eat it. You toss it in the fire when no one's looking. Because nothing in this palace is truly free. Especially not sweetness. You've seen what happens. A maid found with a letter, unsigned, unsealed. They said it was from a footman. They never proved it. She was dismissed the same afternoon. No farewell. No explanation. Just gone. You asked the steward, quietly, where did she go? He shrugged. If she's lucky, home. If not, somewhere colder. And that's the truth of it. Even if someone loves you, truly, fiercely, stupidly, it won't save you. It will expose you. There is no such thing as a secret in the palace, only information waiting to be weaponized. So you learn to kill your feelings early, to bite the inside of your cheek when you're tempted to smile, to fill your head with tasks instead of fantasies, to pretend your chest is hollow and your hands are only made for labor, not holding, not touching, not wanting, because even longing is suspicious. Even stillness is risky. Even a dream can get you exiled. So you love nothing. No one. Not even yourself, not in a way that makes noise. And if you must feel something, feel it quietly. Feel it where no one can see. Feel it in the single tear that doesn't fall, the breath that stays lodged just under your ribs. Because if they see it, they'll take it. Or worse, twist it into something ugly. And you'll be left with nothing but a job, an aching heart, and a new rule. Never feel anything unless it's useful. And never, ever love anyone who can be taken from you. There's no bell to signal your rest. You simply run out of tasks, out of places to clean, out of people to avoid. By the time your fingers stop moving, the palace has gone still. The candles have been snuffed. The corridors echo only your breath. The nobles are tucked in beds of feather and silk. Their dreams taste like roasted lamb and wine. Yours taste like linen soap and the memory of warmth. You return to your corner of the servants' wing, a narrow room barely wide enough for the 3 cots pressed against the wall. 2 of them already creak with breath. The other maids are asleep, faces turned to the wall, shoes kicked halfway off, arms curled like question marks. You undress in the dark. You know the layout by now. Where the nail catches on the floorboard. Where the water jug is warm from someone else's hands. Your uniform comes off slowly, one layer at a time, as if peeling back the day. The apron still smells like stew. The hem is damp from mop water. The corset is the hardest, not just because it's tight, but because it takes effort to breathe again. When you lie down, your muscles ache, but they don't ask for mercy. They've given up asking. Your mattress is straw, thin as a secret, poking through the sheet. The blanket is shared. You fold it corner to corner, claiming just enough to cover your feet. There is no pillow, just a rolled-up shift under your neck. You close your eyes, then open them again, then close them. Sleep doesn't come quickly, not when your thoughts are louder than your heartbeat. Did you forget to return the hairpin? Did you scrub under the table legs? Did the lady notice the missing ribbon, or did someone else take the blame? Did anyone see you yawn near the west corridor? Each question circles like a moth around the lamp of your mind, flickering, frantic, refusing to burn out. You listen. Outside the window, you hear the wind moving through ivy. Further off, footsteps, probably the steward making final rounds. Even further, a cough, muffled, someone dreaming, someone sobbing. You're not sure anymore. The walls are too thin for privacy, too thick for certainty. You try to count your breath. In, out, 1, 2. But just as you drift, just as the warmth finally finds your toes, the bell rings. Not loud, just one chime. It echoes like a cold spoon down your spine. You sit up, automatically, but then it stops. Someone else went. You lie back down. Your body trembles, but not from cold, from readiness. Even in bed, even in darkness, you're prepared to rise. Because here, rest is a loan, not a right, and at any moment, someone may collect. You curl your legs up tighter, turn your face to the wall. You think of home, if you remember it. The scent of old blankets. The way silence used to mean peace, not punishment. You miss things, small, dumb things. The sound of your mother boiling potatoes. The way your brother used to hum when nervous. The feeling of owning a sock with both heels intact. You miss your name, the way it sounded before it was replaced by girl, maid, you there. No one calls you by it now. Sometimes you whisper it to yourself, just to make sure it still exists. The cot creaks beneath you as you shift. Outside, a pair of heels clicks distantly across stone. Some noblewoman late from an affair, or a nightmare, or a mood she didn't like. You freeze, wait, breathe. The sound fades. The night returns to stillness, but it never gives you silence. You hear the castle settle. You feel the weight of the stone above you, ceilings so high they forget you exist. You picture the gowns hanging in closets, asleep like royal ghosts. The empty goblets, the forgotten forks, the faint scent of roses still clinging to the hallway carpets. And beneath it all, you, not quite dreaming, not quite gone, just one breath away from tomorrow. From the same bell, same corridor, same tray, same silence. You will rise before the sun. You will carry the day again, and no one will notice. But for now, in this sliver of stolen stillness, you let your eyes close. Not because you're free, but because your body has decided. That's enough for today. So yes, being a palace maid sounds poetic from far away, from the safety of history books and candlelit dramas. But if you lived it, even for a single day, you'd see it for what it really was. Exhaustion wrapped in silence, beauty built on backs no one thanks. You'd wake before light and sleep after it dies. You'd serve people who forget you the moment they turn away. You'd carry secrets not because you're trusted, but because you're ignored. You'd learn that silence isn't peaceful, it's expected. That your hands exist only in service to someone else's reflection. That your spine stays straight, not out of pride, but out of fear. That your name disappears the moment you put on the apron. And even though you sleep beneath the same roof as royalty, you are not part of the story. You are not the queen. You are not the villain. You're not even the background character. You're the shadow behind the background. History doesn't mention you. It forgets your calloused hands, your threadbare shoes, the bruise on your hip from carrying the tray that no one took. But you were there. In every polished surface, every perfectly tied corset, every goblet filled before it was empty, Every bed warmed before a noble slipped beneath the furs. You made the palace function. And the price was simple. Everything you were, your time, your body, your thoughts, your voice, in exchange for a life where your presence was expected, but your absence would go unnoticed. You didn't get to dream. You didn't get to want. You didn't even get to collapse. Not until everyone else had already closed their eyes. And yet, you endured. That's what's haunting. Not the cruelty, not even the loneliness, but the fact that you learned to survive without being seen, that you trained yourself to vanish so completely, no one ever questioned where you went. So if you think you could last a day as a palace maid, maybe you could. But the real question is, could you survive being invisible for a lifetime? And if not, then maybe next time you pass a cleaning girl in a hallway, in a uniform a little too tight, holding a tray a little too carefully, don't just look through her. Look at her. And maybe, just maybe, nod. She'll never expect it. But she'll remember. In the 14th century, being born into nobility meant you had more than bread to eat and didn't sleep on hay. That was the dream. Jeanne de Clisson had that dream. She was born Jeanne de Belleville, in the French town of Montaigu. Her family was noble, wealthy, land-owning, and politically well-connected, everything that was supposed to guarantee safety in a century that had none. She married young, because that's what noble girls did. Marriage wasn't about love, it was about land, alliance, legacy. Her first husband died. That was common. People died often, especially husbands. She remarried. This time to Olivier de Clisson, a Breton nobleman with money, status, and a castle. He had a sword. That meant he was important. Also meant he would eventually die. They had children. At least 5. Some of them didn't survive infancy. Again, normal. One of them would later become a pirate with her. Also normal. Apparently. Jean's life was what people in her class considered comfortable. She had maids. She had land. She probably had a room with a window. She embroidered. She organized feasts. She waited at the castle for news from the battlefield, or worse, Paris. She drank wine that wasn't watered down. She wrote letters, probably by candlelight, probably while wondering if her husband was dead yet. She had duties, of course. Running a noble household was less tea party, more logistical warfare. There were lands to manage, taxes to collect, servants to control, plague to avoid, gossip to deflect, other noblewomen to impress. It was exhausting, just with better shoes. She was respected. That meant people bowed and whispered behind her back. She had status. That meant she was both protected and targeted. She was a noblewoman, but a woman first, meaning she had no political power, no vote, no army. If the king wanted her land, he could take it. If the king wanted her husband gone, he could vanish. If the king wanted her quiet, well, history tells us what came next. But at this point in the story, Jean was not angry. Not yet. She wasn't a pirate. Not yet. She was just another woman, in a dress, with too many layers and not enough rights. Another quiet, noble life that history would forget. That's the thing about stability in medieval France. It was only stable until the crown decided otherwise. She probably thought she was safe. A family name, a fortified home, a loyal husband with royal ties. She might have thought she could grow old watching her children marry, inherit, maybe even survive. But that was the illusion. Because in medieval France, loyalty didn't buy security, obedience didn't buy protection, and noble birth didn't buy mercy. Soon, Jeanne would lose everything she thought was hers. Her husband, her land, her title, her place in the quiet halls of noble society. And when that happened, she wouldn't ask for justice. She would go looking for blood. But for now, she waited, wrote letters, breathed the clean air of her estate, raised her children, and thought, foolishly, that her life would always be like this. In the 14th century, being married to a nobleman was supposed to mean security, position, respect. Jean de Clisson had all of that. A title, land, children, a husband, with power. His name was Olivier de Clisson, Lord of Brittany, loyal to the French crown, experienced in battle, well-connected, and wealthy. None of that saved him, and none of that would save her. Olivier wasn't just a nobleman. He was a political piece in a game much larger than his own household. Brittany was a land caught between two crowns, France and England, both fighting for dominance in what would become the 100 Years' War. Loyalties shifted like tides. And being in the wrong place at the wrong time was more dangerous than any sword. Olivier had sworn loyalty to the French. He fought in their wars. He served their king. But loyalty was fragile. Allegiances were temporary. And sometimes, a man didn't have to betray the crown to become inconvenient. Sometimes, he just had to know too much, or be too visible, or be too popular. Jean likely didn't question his travel to Paris in 1343. It was supposed to be routine, a council, a meeting, another noble called to court. He probably kissed her goodbye, promised to be back by harvest. They had done this before, but this time was different. He never came back. No warning, no explanation, just silence. Until the silence broke with a message. Not a letter, not a royal decree, but something worse. News that Olivier had been executed. Quietly, without trial, without defense. His head sent to Nantes. Displayed on a pike above the city walls. Jean wasn't invited to the proceedings. She wasn't notified beforehand. The man who had shared her bed, who had fought for his king, who had fathered her children, had been removed like a broken tool. That was when she learned what every noblewoman eventually did. Marriage didn't protect you. Titles didn't protect you. Even obedience didn't protect you. Olivier was gone, and the world moved on. The court didn't offer condolences. The crown didn't offer reasons. She was left with only whispers about betrayal, about politics, about power. But none of the whispers mattered. What mattered was this: her husband had been taken not by enemies, but by the very system he had served. And if the crown could do that to him, what did that mean for her? Jean was now a widow. And in the medieval world, that meant she was both visible and vulnerable. Widows could be useful, married off again, stripped of lands, silenced with ceremony. She knew what was expected: mourning clothes, bowed head, quiet withdrawal. But Jean didn't bow, because her husband's death wasn't just personal, it was political, and the shame didn't stop with his execution. It began there. What the crown hadn't understood was that in trying to make an example of Olivier, they had created something else. They had created Jean. And while most noble women would fade quietly into black lace and prayer books, Jean began turning her grief into something sharper. Not louder, but sharper, because being a nobleman's wife never guaranteed safety. But being his widow? That made her dangerous. Paris in 1343 was not a place for trust. It was a city of masks, rumors, and quiet knives. Olivier de Clisson walked into that city wearing his title, his loyalty, and perhaps, fatally, his pride. He had been called there by the French king, supposedly to discuss military matters. Brittany was unstable, and Olivier was a valuable voice. Or so he thought. Men like him often died, believing they were still useful. He never left the city alive. There was no trial, no defense, no audience. Olivier was arrested, imprisoned, and executed. Quietly. A quick beheading in the darkness of the Bastille. His body was sent to a shallow grave. His head, however, was sent somewhere far more personal, home. They placed it on a spike above the gates of Nantes. Public. Deliberate. A statement. That's where Jeanne saw it. Imagine that. You send your husband off on royal business. You wait weeks for a letter. You get none. Then, one day, you step outside your carriage and see his face above the gate. Not smiling, not speaking, just staring, empty-eyed, the wind turning him into a warning. That wasn't just grief, that was humiliation. The king offered no explanation, only silence. Perhaps they suspected Olivier of treason. Perhaps he knew something he shouldn't. Perhaps he said something too bold. Or maybe He was simply in the wrong political faction when the music stopped. Whatever the reason, the outcome was the same. A man removed, a message sent, and a woman left behind to clean up the memory. Jeanne understood the symbolism. This wasn't a murder, it was a message. They didn't just take her husband, they put him on display to show the other nobles, to remind the wives, this is what happens to those who forget their place. And Jeanne, like many noble women, was expected to behave, to lower her eyes, to mourn quietly, to raise her sons alone and say nothing dangerous at dinner. But Jeanne was already beginning to rot inside. Not from sadness, but from something colder, something sharper, because when you see your husband's head on a spike, the questions don't stop, they multiply. Who gave the order? Why was he silenced? Who watched it happen and stayed silent? And most dangerously of all, who still walks free? Jeanne had lived her life within walls, but heads don't belong on walls. And the moment she saw his, she knew, this wasn't over, this wasn't grief, this was the beginning. When Olivier de Clisson was executed, Jeanne didn't cry in public. She didn't faint, she didn't throw herself at the feet of the king begging for an explanation. Because none of it would have mattered. There was no trial, no defense, no last-minute plea. Olivier was arrested, condemned, and executed quietly in Paris, then displayed loudly in Nantes. His head was sent back and mounted above the city gate like a trophy. Not just removed, revealed. That was the point. They didn't want just to kill a man. They wanted to humiliate a legacy. For Jeanne, it wasn't simply the loss of her husband. It was the public stripping of everything she was supposed to be protected by. Title, status, nobility, loyalty. None of it had saved him. And by extension, none of it could save her either. A nobleman executed without trial was a warning. But a noblewoman forced to look up and see her husband's face rotting above a gate. That was something colder. It was the crown reminding everyone that no one, not even the well-born, was safe from suspicion or from spectacle. This wasn't justice, it was performance. Political theatre wrapped in blood and silence. And Jeanne had a front-row seat. People whispered, of course. They always do. Some said Olivier had betrayed the French crown. Others believed he had known something he wasn't supposed to. But the truth? No one really knew. Or if they did, they weren't speaking. Because the kind of power that kills without trial is the kind that silences everyone else. Jeanne was expected to grieve, expected to wear black, to lower her eyes, to become smaller. That was the medieval widow's script. But this wasn't grief, she felt. Not really. It was something more electric, more dangerous, because the moment grief meets public shame, something new is born, humiliation. And humiliation has teeth. She had done everything right. Married well, birthed heirs, played her part in noble society. She had been the quiet woman waiting by the window, tending to estates, writing letters in soft candlelight. And they had still chosen to crush her. Not quietly, not discreetly, but loudly, visibly. She wasn't just mourning a man. She was watching her identity get nailed to a wall. And that was the turning point. She realized something that changes people forever. That loyalty to power means nothing when power doesn't care about you. That being noble doesn't protect you from being disposable. That being proper, patient, and polite doesn't shield you when the crown decides you're in the way. So no, she didn't weep in the streets. She didn't beg. She didn't collapse. She planned. Because once you understand that your life means nothing to the people in charge, you have a choice. Disappear quietly, or make yourself impossible to ignore. Jeanne chose the second. And the sea, patient and wide, was waiting. After her husband's execution, Jeanne didn't scream. She didn't riot. She didn't beg the king for answers. That would have been foolish. The French crown didn't negotiate with widows, especially not ones it had just humiliated. Instead, she did something worse. She started thinking. They had taken her title. Her name was now a shadow in court. Her allies had gone silent. Her sons still lived, but with no guarantee of safety. Nobility meant nothing anymore, only who you served. Jean had served the crown, and the crown had spit her out. So she did what no one expected a disgraced noblewoman to do. She sold everything: her lands, her homes, her furniture, jewelry, paintings, grain stores, livestock, silks, things passed down for generations, gone in a season. She liquidated her world, quietly and efficiently, not for mourning, for funding. Because vengeance has a price. And Jean was done paying it in dignity. People whispered, of course, they always do. Some said she had lost her mind. Others said she was fleeing the crown's wrath. But the truth was simpler. She was building something. Not a rebellion, not a lawsuit, a fleet. She didn't stay in her castle, waiting for justice. She left, took her children, took what gold remained, moved into exile, far from the royal eye, somewhere coastal, somewhere unassuming, somewhere ships could dock and not ask questions, because Jean had made a decision. She would no longer ask for justice, she would deliver it. She began purchasing vessels, not warships. She wasn't an admiral, but merchant ships could be stripped and rebuilt, hulls repainted, sails replaced, storage converted into barracks, and soon a strange little fleet was forming under her command. Black wood, red sails, quiet crews. She paid them well, very well. Because she wasn't buying sailors, she was buying silence. This wasn't about piracy, it wasn't about riches. Jean wasn't interested in gold, she was interested in names. And those names were on royal manifests, carved into ships, listed among France's nobility. Her targets weren't random. They were precise. They wore rings and badges. They sat in royal councils, and they had watched her husband die. So no, Jean wasn't crazy. She was methodical. She was careful. And she was done playing the part of the quiet widow. She had once hosted feasts in stone halls. Now she mapped naval choke points by candlelight. She had once stitched gowns. Now she stitched sails. This wasn't exile. It was preparation. And the sea was waiting. It didn't happen overnight. No one wakes up and becomes a pirate. Not even Jeanne de Clisson. She didn't raise a skull flag. She didn't make a speech. She simply disappeared from land and began to move with the tide. The woman once seen riding through Nantes in silk now wore black leather and salt-stained wool. Her court was gone. Her crew replaced it. They called it the Black Fleet. 3 ships, stripped of ceremony and painted a deep, unnatural black. No royal insignias. No merchant symbols. No flags that asked permission. Only sails, dark and heavy, cutting through fog like quiet rage. There were no songs, no drums, just direction. Jean wasn't interested in treasure. She wasn't chasing gold. She had enough to fund the mission. What she wanted, what she hunted, was men. Specific men. French noblemen, royal officials, navy officers. Names, she remembered. Names that smiled at her husband before they betrayed him. She became a ghost in the channel between France and England. The war had made that sea busy, chaotic, perfect. Ships moved in confusion. Allegiances shifted by the week. No one expected an aristocratic widow to be the one causing blood to stain the water, and that was her advantage. She struck at night. No declarations. No boarding speeches. Her ships would surround the target like a noose. Crossbows first, swords second, silence always. Captains died, nobles vanished. Sailors lived, but only if they had no titles. She left them alive, on purpose. Let them sail back. Let them tell the story. Because Jean wasn't just killing, she was building a legend. The survivors spoke of a woman at the helm. Pale hair, no mask. She didn't shout. She didn't bark orders. She pointed, and men obeyed. Some said she carried her children aboard. Others swore she watched every death without blinking. Some stories claim she executed her targets personally, a blade across the throat, a final look, a quiet nod. Others claim she had them tied to the mast, and left for the tide, or dumped overboard with their hands still bound. None of it could be proven, but that didn't matter. Fear works faster than fact, and soon French officers started avoiding the sea. Merchant vessels rerouted. Even English captains, usually enemies, began speaking her name with caution. Jeanne de Clisson had become what no woman in her century was supposed to be. A weapon. A myth. A problem too dangerous to name out loud. She had no kingdom, no court, no crown, but she had the sea, and she ruled it in black. Jeanne de Clisson was not in it for the spoils. Her ships didn't search for barrels of wine or chests of coins. Her crew didn't celebrate over treasure. In fact, most of the time, they left it behind, floating in the wreckage, untouched. Because Jeanne wasn't building wealth, she was settling scores. Every raid had a purpose. Every name on her list had a face, a history, a betrayal. The men she targeted weren't chosen at random. They were royal officials, French nobles, men who had raised a glass in Paris while her husband bled in silence, men who had signed orders, whispered accusations, or simply stood by and watched. That was enough. She didn't need proof. She needed memory, and memory was all she had left. When her ships approached, the outcome was always the same. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't parley. There was no flag of truce, no opening offer. Her fleet, black, sleek, silent, moved like a knife in the fog. Once her crew boarded, there were only two kinds of men, the ones with titles and the ones who weren't worth killing. Her sailors knew what to do. Capture the officers, isolate the nobles. Spare the lower crew, always leave survivors, just enough to carry the story forward. Because Jeanne didn't just want revenge. She wanted fear. She wanted the names on her list to know they were being hunted. That the sea was no longer theirs. That nowhere, no ship, no rank, no uniform could protect them. Stories spread quickly. Not official reports. Those were silenced. But sailors talk. Port towns gossip. Bartenders overhear. And what they heard was this. There was a woman out there, with no king, no flag, and no mercy. She hunted men with rings on their fingers and secrets in their scrolls. She didn't steal. She executed. Not for profit, but for justice. Witnesses, few and shaken, described her as calm, methodical. They said she wore no armor, no jewelry, that she stood in plain black and watched the killings in silence, that she gave no speeches. She only nodded, and the blade fell. Some said she slit throats herself. Others said she whispered names before each execution, like reading from scripture. Most agreed on one detail. She never looked away. She wanted them to see her, to remember her, to understand who had sent the blade. And when it was done, her ships vanished again, back into the fog, into the night, into legend. This wasn't piracy. It was punishment. And soon, French nobles began avoiding the sea altogether. They travelled inland. They postponed voyages. They sent letters in fear. Because they didn't know where Jeanne was, only that she was still out there, watching, waiting, crossing out names, one by one. She didn't ask for justice anymore. She delivered it. In black sails, in red water, in silence. Jeanne de Clisson didn't wage war. She didn't storm ports or sink fleets. She didn't need to. What she did was quieter, more focused, and somehow, far more terrifying. Her black fleet didn't engage in long battles. There were no drawn-out sea fights, no cannon fire, no chaotic boarding scenes like in stories. She preferred precision. She chose her targets carefully. Ships carrying noblemen, royal envoys, anyone flying a French flag with a little too much confidence. Her crew would stalk them for hours, sometimes days, waiting for fog, nightfall, or the moment a ship drifted slightly too far from its convoy. Then they would strike, fast, clean, silent. The first thing most ships noticed was the color. Jeanne's sails were black, not dark blue, not brown, black like ink. black like smoke. And they moved without sound. No flags, no horns, no drums. Just wind and shadow. Then came the grappling hooks, the boards, the blades. But Jean didn't slaughter everyone. That was never her intent. She wasn't after chaos. She was after fear. So her orders were simple. Spare the crew. Kill the officers. Make it personal. And they did. Always with control. No screaming. No looting. Just executions. Quiet, brutal, and final. Some say she made the captured nobles kneel. Others say she left them hanging from the mast, bodies swinging above the sea like forgotten warnings. Still others claimed she dropped them into the water, hands tied, and watched them vanish beneath the waves. No one knows for sure, because no one ever wanted to find out firsthand. But what is certain is this: those left alive always told the tale, and they always said the same thing. It wasn't the violence that haunted them, it was the calm. Jean didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She simply watched, sometimes from the deck, sometimes from the shadows, pale, silent, unmoving, like judgment carved from stone. And that silence spread faster than fire. Port towns whispered of her. Sailors refused to board certain ships. French nobles hired guards, changed routes, wrote wills. The king's officials downplayed it. Of course. They called her a criminal, a traitor, a madwoman. But no one volunteered to go after her, because Jean had built something stronger than a navy. She had built a reputation, and in the medieval world, fear was more effective than any fleet. Even English sailors, technically her allies, began to fear those dark sails. Because once you've earned a myth, no one cares which side you're on. You are danger. You are death. You are legend. And Jean leaned into that legend. No banners, no mercy, no errors. Just a noble woman with a list and a sea full of enemies. And every time a new ship disappeared, or a noble failed to arrive at port, or a body washed up on shore, people wondered. Was it pirates? Or was it her? The woman in black. The widow with a blade. The sea's quiet executioner. Jean de Clisson didn't look like a nightmare. Not at first glance. She had been a noblewoman, a mother of 5, a widow. The kind of woman people expected to cry quietly in corners, not command a fleet of killers. And that's why she was so effective. No one saw her coming. Not the nobles, not the sailors. Not the men who had signed her husband's death behind velvet curtains. They expected vengeance to be loud, messy, impulsive. They didn't expect it to sail silently under black sails with the wind at its back. She was, after all, just a woman. That meant she was supposed to grieve, not hunt. But Jean broke that script. She brought her son with her. Yes, her son. One of the few who survived childhood. He stood beside her on the deck, watching as names were crossed off her list. It wasn't maternal. It was intentional. She wanted him to see. She didn't hide behind crew or captains. She stood at the front, hair uncovered, face visible. She didn't want to be mistaken. She wanted every man she killed to look her in the eye and know exactly who she was. They said she never wore a hat, not to protect herself from the sun or the salt or the cold sea air, because she believed death should have a face. Her face. She wasn't a faceless pirate. She wasn't a masked bandit. She was Jean de Clisson, widow of Olivier, mother of the Black Fleet, and deliverer of royal punishment. The nobles didn't know how to speak of her. The records are full of contradictions. Some call her a savage, others a noble rebel. A few simply leave her unnamed, referring only to a woman of violence. History has always had trouble labeling women who refused to die quietly, but the stories survived, because people love monsters, especially when they wear dresses. In taverns and ports, sailors told of her, softly, respectfully. She became a ghost story, a warning, a riddle. Sail east too far, they said, and you'll see her ship, black as a grave, with a woman at the helm who doesn't blink. Children were told to behave, or Jean would come for them. Drunk men swore they had seen her ship, even if they hadn't. And officers, especially French ones, learned to double-check passenger lists and say their prayers before setting sail, because no one could predict her. No one could find her. and no one could stop her. The French crown couldn't catch her, the English didn't want to, and the sea, wild, lawless, loyal to no throne, seemed to carry her faster than any fleet could follow. She wasn't building an empire. She wasn't claiming land. She had no throne, no coin, no flag. Only vengeance. And she wore it better than silk. By now, Jean de Clisson had raided ships, executed nobles, painted her sails black, and filled the sea with whispers. But strangely, no fleet was sent after her, no bounty, no royal chase. Because no one thought it was her, not really. The French court heard the rumors of a woman commanding a fleet, targeting French ships, sparing no nobles. But they didn't believe them. Not at first. The reports were scattered, inconsistent, sensational. A widow? They said. Surely not. Piracy was a man's crime. And noblewomen didn't become pirates. They became nuns, or exiles, or quietly broken figures in large stone houses. Not Jean. But the disbelief worked in her favor. Every time someone laughed off the idea of a lady with a warship, she gained another week of freedom, another chance to strike. They thought she was a ghost story, a myth, a sailor's exaggeration after too much wine. A woman in black, they said, with red sails and a list of names. It sounded like folklore, it sounded like fear, it sounded like fiction, but it wasn't. She had found the one weapon even sharper than her sword, invisibility in plain sight. Men underestimated her. Kings ignored her. Officers dismissed the survivors' reports as panic. A noblewoman, they muttered. Couldn't possibly. But she did. By the time the truth started sinking in, it was already too late. She had crossed too many names off, made too many disappear. The damage had been done, not just to people, but to reputation, to pride. Jean hadn't just killed men. She had embarrassed power, and that was something much harder to forgive. Eventually, the French crown began to respond. Cautiously, quietly, ships were commissioned, rewards quietly suggested, but still, no full pursuit, no open declaration. Because even now, they couldn't admit it. To name her would be to legitimize her. So they said nothing. Hoped she would fade, that her story would sink quietly beneath the waves like the ships she left behind. But she didn't fade. She was never loud, never flamboyant, but she was consistent, focused, relentless. And every noble who stepped onto a ship with too much confidence wondered, what if she's waiting? What if this is the ship she's watching? And that uncertainty was all she needed. Because fear doesn't require a fleet. It just needs a name whispered at the right time, in the right tavern, by the right trembling voice. And Jean de Clisson had become that name. Not a pirate, not a queen. Something worse. A widow they refused to take seriously. Until it was far, far too late. Revenge stories usually end with a crown or a corpse. Jean de Clisson chose neither. She got what she came for, blood, justice, names crossed off, and then she stopped. No declaration, no speech, no grand moment. She simply vanished. The Black Fleet faded, the sails lowered, the executions ceased, ports stopped whispering. And the sea, which had once held its breath whenever Jean's name was spoken, slowly exhaled. Because she was gone, not defeated, not dead, just gone. It wasn't surrender, it was completion. Jean didn't start her campaign to rule the waves. She didn't want to build an empire or collect titles. She wasn't trying to replace the king, only to haunt him. And once that haunting was complete, she saw no reason to continue. She had spent years steering death through fog, years turning noble blood into ghost stories, years becoming the kind of woman history tries to erase because she doesn't fit the narrative. And then, when it was done, she folded herself back into the quiet. She remarried, they say, to an English knight, possibly a mercenary, possibly a man who understood what it meant to survive alongside a storm. She lived out the rest of her life in something close to peace. Not royalty, not fame, just distance, no fortress, no navy, no throne carved from the bones of her enemies. Because Jeanne never wanted to be a queen. She just didn't want to be a widow with nothing. and when justice failed her, she wrote a version of it herself, in salt and blood and silence. It's strange, really. Most people who take up vengeance can't let go. They grow addicted to fury, to the fire. They build kingdoms just to stay angry. But Jean? She didn't crave the fight. She just needed it to end. So when it did, she stepped away. Not because she was tired, not because she was weak, but because she had nothing left to prove. The sea, once her weapon, was allowed to rest. Her ships, once her voice, were docked for good, and her name, spoken only in fear for so long, became something quieter. A memory. A warning. A footnote in the wrong history books. She didn't write a memoir, didn't build a chapel, didn't ask to be remembered. She understood something rare, that the sharpest legacy is one that doesn't beg for attention. It just waits. And though she may have died on land, far from the roar of waves and the stench of vengeance, the ocean remembers, because the sea never forgets the hand that once ruled it without a crown. Jean de Clisson disappeared from the sea, but not from the world. Her black sails stopped haunting the channel, but she didn't vanish into legend just yet. She was still very much alive, just no longer interested in making headlines written in blood. What came next wasn't the ending anyone expected. She remarried. The man's name was Walter Bentley. An English knight, battle-hardened, weathered, possibly just as tired of war as she was. He had fought in the same war that had taken Jean's husband, maybe even on the other side of the same battlefield, but that didn't matter. They were both survivors of the same century. That was enough. This wasn't a royal marriage, not one for diplomacy or titles. It wasn't arranged by crowns or priests or family lines. It wasn't a political move. It was a human one. Two people, scarred, sharp, and strangely still standing, choosing something softer. No war, no revenge, no list of names to cross off. Just life. They lived in England, quietly. Jean, who had once commanded the sea, now commanded a house. A real one. With no sails, no executions, no whispering crew. She raised her remaining children, cooked meals, walked in gardens, let the wind touch her hair without smelling of salt and blood, and for once, no one asked her for orders, no one feared her. And strangely, that was fine. She didn't need to be feared anymore. She had been enough things already. A lady, a wife, a widow, a pirate, a mother, a myth. She didn't need to add ruler to the list. She just needed to be left alone. It said she died peacefully. No ships nearby, no blades drawn, no noble's throat in her hands. Just age and time, and perhaps a final exhale that didn't carry the weight of revenge. But here's the strange part. History doesn't know what to do with this ending. They prefer their pirates dead at sea, their rebels crushed, their women punished. But Jean broke too many rules to be neatly filed away. She got her revenge. She survived. She found love again. And then, she simply kept living. No martyrdom, no downfall. Just a woman who wrote her own story in a century that barely allowed women to speak. There are no statues of her, no cathedrals bearing her name. But somewhere in the quiet spaces between official records and forgotten tombs, Jean de Clisson still exists. Not as a queen, not as a criminal, but as a reminder that sometimes, even in the Middle Ages, a woman could lose everything, burn the world, and then rebuild one of her own choosing. You won't find Jean de Clisson in most schoolbooks. She isn't listed beside Joan of Arc. She's not carved into a cathedral. There's no national holiday in her name. Because Jean didn't die a martyr. She didn't fight for a country. She didn't claim sainthood. She fought for herself. And history has never been kind to women who do that. Her story didn't fit the narrative. A noblewoman turned sea assassin? A grieving widow turned ghost in the Channel? A pirate who targeted her own kingdom, not for treasure, but for revenge. That wasn't the kind of story kings wanted remembered. Textbooks like neat endings. They like clear heroes, clean villains, and battles that decide the fate of nations. Jean didn't offer that. Her war wasn't between France and England. It was between a mother and a crown. between memory and silence, between a woman and the world that had tried to erase her, so they erased her again. She was left out of the grand tales, skipped in lessons, softened in some records, vilified in others. Sometimes she's mentioned as a pirate, sometimes not at all. If you do find her, it's a sentence, a footnote, a rumor dressed up as fact. But make no mistake, she was real. The executions were real. The ships were real. The black sails, the list of names, the men who never made it home, real. And still, the silence held. Because Jean didn't serve empire, she embarrassed it. She reminded noblemen that titles could not protect them, that the sea didn't care about bloodlines, that justice, once ignored, can find its way back through unconventional hands. And worse, she won. She got her revenge. She lived. She remarried. She died of age, not execution. That was the true insult. She survived her story. In a world where most women like her were silenced, Jean wrote her own ending, not with ink, but with wind and blood and silence. And that kind of story is hard to teach in a classroom. Because what would you even call her? A criminal? A heroine? A mother with a fleet? A noblewoman with a sword? She didn't ask for a title. She didn't need one. She had legacy, and legend, and salt in her bones. The textbooks forgot her. The whispers didn't. You'll hear her name in sailor songs, in coastal ghost stories, in the pause that comes when someone says, "There once was a woman." And for some, that's enough. Because the best revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it sails quietly, disappears gracefully, and leaves behind a silence no empire can ever explain. Back then, courts weren't symbols of order, they were tools of power. Judgments weren't about fairness, they were favors, traded behind closed doors, whispered between lords, scribbled into scrolls no one would read. And if you were a woman, you didn't ask for justice. You begged for mercy, and if mercy didn't come, you disappeared quietly, forgotten, forgiven, erased. But Jeanne de Clisson didn't disappear. She sharpened something the courts never expected, a grudge. They took her husband, not in war, not in combat, but in cold silence, executed like a traitor, paraded like a warning. She didn't get a trial. She didn't get a voice. She didn't even get a reason. So she gave herself one. And in a world where justice didn't knock on your door, she boarded a ship and went out to find it. She didn't hold hearings. She held names. She didn't file appeals. She filed steel. She wasn't handed power. She stole it from the ocean, one noble at a time. Because sometimes, in a broken world, justice isn't a scale, it's a sword. And Jean wielded it with both hands. She wasn't trying to inspire. She wasn't trying to start a revolution. She just refused to play dead, refused to wear widowhood like a muzzle, refused to let her story be written by the men who had killed her husband and expected her to sew quietly while they did it. Her vengeance wasn't loud. It was surgical, focused, controlled, the kind of justice that makes bureaucrats tremble and legends take root. She didn't storm castles. She didn't crown herself. She didn't ask to be remembered. But history, no matter how carefully cleaned, couldn't scrub her out completely. Because the sea remembers. It remembers the ships that never made it home, the nobles who vanished in the fog, the black sails that moved like ghosts, the woman who turned grief into purpose and silence into action. You don't learn about Jean in school, because Jean doesn't fit the narrative. She wasn't passive. She wasn't obedient. She wasn't patient. She was exact. And the medieval world feared exact women. So what do we do with her now? A mother, a widow, a pirate, a judge with no courtroom, no robe, only a blade, and a list, and time. Maybe we remember her not because she was perfect, not because she was kind, but because she did what the world told her she couldn't. She got justice, on her terms, with her hands, at sea. And that's what makes her dangerous, even now. Because maybe the most terrifying idea isn't that one woman could do so much damage. It's that she was right to do it. So the next time you're waiting for something to be handled, the next time you're told to stay quiet, be patient, trust the process. Remember, there was a time when the process had no room for people like Jean. And in that time, justice didn't wear robes. It wore a widow's cloak and carried a very sharp sword. She wasn't born to be a symbol. She was born to be obedient. A noble daughter, a wife, a mother, a quiet figure in the background of powerful men. But the world broke that version of her. It took her husband, her title, her place in society, and it expected her to fold, to mourn politely, fade gracefully, and be forgotten. Instead, she bought ships. She sailed into the space where justice had failed and filled it with something colder. She didn't become a hero. She didn't claim to be right. But she made herself unavoidable. And when it was done, she disappeared, not as a martyr, not as a queen, but as something more unsettling, a woman who got revenge and then walked away. She lived, remarried, raised her children, and left the ocean behind. But not the legend, because the sea doesn't keep statues, it keeps stories. And somewhere, between the waves and the wind, her story still whispers. If no one will bring you justice, build a ship. Long before dentistry and tooth fairies, human teeth were seen not just as body parts, but as sacred relics, tiny fragments of the soul. In many ancient cultures, a tooth was more than enamel and root. It was memory, identity, and magic. And sometimes, it was fear. In parts of Viking society, warriors would carve grooves into their teeth, sharp ridges like saw blades, not for combat, but for intimidation. A warrior's grim smile, framed by scarred cheeks and metal, could send a message before he ever raised an axe. Some scholars suggest these carvings had spiritual purposes as well, perhaps to protect the warrior in battle or to terrify enemies into submission. Regardless of the reason, the idea of marking one's own body in such a way reveals how deeply teeth were tied to power and presence. Elsewhere, far from the cold north, in warmer African regions, traditions around teeth were more intimate. Among some tribes, the baby teeth of children were carefully buried beneath the ground. Not discarded, not forgotten, but hidden to protect the child's soul from wandering or being stolen. A lost tooth, if not treated properly, could invite illness or misfortune. The belief was that the tooth, even once it had left the body, still carried a piece of the child's spirit. By burying it, families kept that spirit grounded, safe. In ancient Japan, a similar tenderness existed. Samurai, before battle, might wear the teeth of ancestors, strung as amulets around the neck. The idea was simple, to carry the wisdom and protection of one's bloodline into danger. In this way, a tooth became more than a keepsake. It was a guardian. Even in medieval Europe, teeth were objects of fascination and superstition. It was believed that a witch could curse a person by stealing a tooth and using it in rituals. For this reason, some people would bury lost teeth in the garden or throw them into the fire to destroy the connection, to avoid falling under a spell. It might seem like folklore, but to them, it was real defense. A missing tooth left exposed was like leaving a door open to the unknown. Fast forward to today, and we might drop a baby tooth in a glass of water or leave it under a pillow for a fairy to trade with coins. A charming ritual, yes. But when compared to the reverence of the past, it feels almost hollow. In ancient times, the tooth was not a trinket. It was a piece of you, one that deserved to be honored, buried, protected, or worn with pride. So imagine, if you were suddenly dropped into the medieval world and you lost a tooth during a meal, crunching on barley bread, perhaps you wouldn't just spit it out and carry on. You'd stop. You'd wrap it in cloth. You might whisper a prayer. You'd find earth, stone, or fire, and you'd choose, carefully, how to release it. Because in that world, even a single tooth could tip the balance between safety and danger, between blessing and curse. And if you forgot that, well, you might not last the night. Hair grows silently. It curls, flows, falls, carrying the quiet history of a person's life. For many ancient peoples, hair was not just part of the body. It was memory. It was essence. And when someone passed away, their hair did not. In ancient Rome, when a loved one died, the mourning family might cut a lock of the person's hair and keep it. Not hidden in a box, but woven into jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, rings. These were worn not for fashion, but for remembrance. To the Romans, the hair held the spirit's warmth. It was still alive in its own way. A strand of hair could whisper stories long after the voice had gone quiet. During the Victorian era, centuries later, this tradition evolved into an entire art form. Mourning jewelry made of human hair became common. Wives wore their husband's curls after his death. Mothers wore their child's braids. The pieces were delicate, looped into patterns of flowers or knots, and always worn close to the skin. To touch it was to touch memory. There was comfort in that. But go further back, to older, quieter centuries, and hair held other powers too. In many cultures, it was believed that cutting your hair after a tragedy helped to release sorrow. Letting hair fall to the floor was a way to let grief fall with it. Monks shaved their heads not only for humility, but to sever worldly ties. Warriors might grow their hair long during battle, only to cut it short once they returned home, symbolizing the shedding of fear, or perhaps survival itself. And there were darker beliefs. In medieval Europe, it was said that if someone wished you harm, all they needed was a piece of your hair. Witches, according to legend, could twist your fate into knots using strands you left behind. That is why people were careful with their fallen hair. Some burned it, some buried it. A single strand could become a spell, or a curse. In Japan, temples sometimes held ceremonies to burn the combs of women who had served others all their lives, maids, wives, widows. The tangled strands caught in the teeth of these combs were seen as tired spirits. Offering the comb to fire was a quiet ritual of release. It was a way of saying, "Thank you, you may rest now." Hair was sacred because it stayed behind. Long after breath left the body, hair remained. It grew slowly while we lived. It lingered when we were gone. And perhaps that's why it became such a powerful thread between the living and the dead. It was always there, soft, silent, persistent. Now imagine, you live in the medieval world, and your sister has just passed. You don't take a photograph, you don't post a memory. Instead, you kneel beside her and carefully cut a lock of her hair. You twist it into a ring or a braid. You keep it close, perhaps under your robe or tied into your belt. It isn't just a keepsake. It's a piece of her. Still warm, still speaking, still with you. And perhaps, at night, when you touch it, you feel her near, not in fear, but in comfort. Because in that world, hair wasn't trash. It wasn't something to sweep up and throw away. It was a line, fragile, yes, but strong enough to carry love across the veil. And if you lost that thread, you might lose your way home. Before alarm clocks and phone screens, there was the rooster, a humble bird with feathers like fire and a voice that split the darkness. Its crowing marked the edge between night and day, dream and waking, shadow and sun. But in many old cultures, that sound, the first crow before dawn, meant something more. It wasn't just time to rise, it was time for spirits to retreat. In rural parts of Eastern Europe, people once believed the rooster was the only creature that could see spirits, not sense them, not feel them, but truly see them. When a rooster crowed, it wasn't simply announcing the dawn, it was issuing a warning. To the spirits of the dead, to the things that lingered in the corners, to the silent watchers of the night, they had until the crow. After that, they had to go. In this worldview, the rooster wasn't just a bird. It was a guardian, a gatekeeper, a kind of feathered priest standing at the doorway of the world. Even today, echoes of this belief remain. In folk tales, ghosts vanish at the sound of a rooster. Vampires, witches, wandering souls, all sent back to wherever they came from when that thin, rising call pierced the sky. In some villages, it was common to paint roosters on rooftops or hang rooster-shaped weather vanes, not for decoration, for protection, because the rooster watched, because the rooster warned. Even in ancient Rome, soldiers believed the rooster's crow carried power. They brought them into camps to mark the passing of night watches. Some believed that the bird's crow helped drive away fear in the darkest hours. A fragile sound, but somehow defiant, reminding everyone that morning would return. But the rooster didn't just live in stories. It lived in the center of village life, in the yard, on the fence post, beneath the kitchen window, always watching, always listening. And if one day it stopped crowing, if a rooster suddenly went quiet or died without reason, it was said to be a bad omen, a warning, not just of death or disease, but of something spiritual, a presence, perhaps, that had gone unnoticed until the guardian fell silent. Some believed the rooster could carry sins, that if you whispered your worries to it before dawn, the crow would take them away. One crow, one cleansing breath, you'd wake lighter. In Jewish tradition, a ritual called kaparo uses a live rooster in a symbolic act of transferring one's sins. The bird is gently swung around the head and then offered as charity or sacrifice. The belief? That it carries away darkness and returns light. So once again, imagine yourself waking in an older world, one without streetlights or door locks. You've lit a single candle, shadows dance. The wind moves in strange ways. You wait, the night stretches long, but then you hear it. A single crow, clear, rising, sure, and just like that, the dread begins to fade, not because the sun is up, but because the rooster has spoken. Because in the old world, that sound was more than time. It was protection, it was power, it was a bird, standing small in the dirt, guarding your soul. And if you laughed it off, if you ignored it, you might just find yourself awake at the wrong hour, with no crow to guide you home. Fire is not quiet. It crackles, it dances, it consumes. But in many ancient cultures, fire was not only destruction, it was cleansing, sacred. A kind of silent baptism that touched not the body, but the earth itself. Long ago, before fireworks or furnaces, people would gather at the turning of the year, not for celebration, but for purification. They believed that the first fire of the new year had power, not just to warm or cook, but to bless. This fire was not to be taken lightly. It had to be pure, often kindled by friction or flint, untouched by the remnants of the old year. A new flame for a new beginning. In Celtic lands, festivals like Imbolc and Beltane centered around fire. Great bonfires were lit on hilltops as the seasons changed. People led their cattle between the flames, not to harm them, but to cleanse them, smoke as a shield, embers as a blessing. It was said that land walked through fire would be fruitful, that spirits feared it, that illness, bad luck, and bitterness could be burned away in silence. But fire was not always grand. In many homes, it lived quietly in the hearth, at the center of life. In Slavic households, the fire in the hearth was never allowed to go out. Ever. Letting it die was seen as letting the home's soul weaken. Fire was not just a tool, it was a presence, a spirit. Some whispered prayers to it before bed. Others offered crumbs or drops of wine into the coals, a gift for protection, a thank you. In Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest religions, fire is the symbol of truth and divine order. Temples kept flames burning continuously, some for over 1,000 years. These fires were tended like royalty, guarded with reverence, never polluted with breath or impure fuel. The belief was simple. As long as the fire burned, so too did the harmony of the universe. If it ever went out, the balance could unravel. Even in medieval Christian Europe, echoes of this reverence remained. Candles were lit at altars not just for light, but for memory, for prayer. The Paschal candle, lit at Easter, represented the light of resurrection. It was carried through churches like a holy thread, binding past to present, earth to heaven. But fire could also be feared, because fire sees everything. It burns both good and evil. It has no favorites. That's why so many purification rituals were done in silence. No shouting, no spectacle, just flame and shadow. In rural traditions, the ashes of sacred fires were scattered over fields, to bless the soil, to feed it with memory. Some families saved a coal from the New Year's fire, carrying it home wrapped in cloth, believing it would keep sickness away. Now imagine this. You're living in a time without electricity. The world is cold. Still, you strike a flint, coax a spark, and from that spark grows the first fire of the year. You don't speak. You simply watch, because this isn't just warmth, it's a promise, a beginning, a ritual older than your name. And if you let it go out too soon, if you mocked it, you might find the land won't listen to your prayers this year. or your house might grow colder than stone. Because in the old world, fire was never just fire. It was memory, it was mercy, and it was watching, tucked away in quiet corners of certain Shinto shrines, far from the tourist paths and temple bells, are small offerings that many visitors might overlook. Not coins, not incense, but hair, tangled hair, strands of it, tied in bundles, placed gently on cloth, or sealed in envelopes with handwritten notes. These are not the remnants of illness or mourning, they are gifts, offerings of appreciation for service done in silence. You see, in traditional Japanese belief, even things that seem lifeless, tools, needles, brushes, and even hair, can have spirits. This idea is known as tsukumogami, that objects, after many years of faithful use, can develop a kind of soul, a quiet awareness, not one that speaks or moves, but one that deserves respect. Hair, especially, holds a strange place in this world. It is part of us, yet separate. It grows, it falls, it endures. And in Japan, hair is more than vanity. It is memory, expression, identity. For centuries, women in Japan took great care of their hair. Long, dark, brushed daily with quiet attention. But every stroke of the comb left behind something. Strands caught in the teeth, small tangles that never made their way back. These weren't thrown away casually. Some were gathered, kept, honored. In certain traditions, old hair, especially from combs and brushes, was collected throughout the year and brought to shrines in special ceremonies. These events, like the Harikuyo Memorial for broken sewing needles, were not loud or elaborate. They were soft, humble, a way of saying thank you, not just to the tools, but to the hair itself, for being part of one's life, for falling without protest, for carrying beauty, burden, and time. Some shrines even specialize in receiving these offerings. Small wooden plaques bear the wishes of those who left their hair behind. For strength, for peace, for letting go. Because sometimes hair carries more than tangles. It holds grief, longing, a memory you're finally ready to release. To leave a bundle of hair at such a shrine is not superstition. It's closure. In some cases, people bring the hair of loved ones who have passed, especially mothers or grandmothers, hair that once framed a familiar smile, hair that once tickled your face when held. It's laid down gently, as if saying, "Thank you for staying with me, even when you were tired." Now imagine this. You live in an older time, a world of tatami floors and paper walls. Each morning, you sit and brush your hair. You gather what's left behind, and you do not throw it away. You save it, because in your world, even something as small as a fallen strand matters. It served, it stayed, it deserves to be remembered. And if you were to toss it aside without thought, perhaps the spirit in the strand would feel forgotten. Because in the quiet corners of Japan, even the smallest parts of us are seen. Even the most ordinary acts of care are honored. Even tangled hair is thanked. It's a quiet moment. A child wiggles a loose tooth with their tongue, a soft pop, a tiny gap, a small white tooth held between fingers. To us, it may seem like a simple childhood memory. But in nearly every corner of the world, that tiny tooth has carried surprisingly big meaning. The shedding of baby teeth marks a threshold, the end of something small, the beginning of something new. And across cultures, this moment has never gone unnoticed. In fact, it has inspired some of the most curious, sweet, and even mystical traditions humanity has ever created. In the West, many know the tale of the tooth fairy, a gentle, invisible figure who exchanges the lost tooth for coins or a small gift, often while the child sleeps. It seems like modern folklore, but its roots go deep. Earlier versions spoke of witches stealing teeth for spells. To prevent this, people began hiding teeth under pillows, in boxes, even in shoes. Over time, fear softened into wonder. The tooth, once a target for dark magic, became a token of reward. But not everywhere does the tooth go under a pillow. In Middle Eastern countries, the tradition is skyward. Children often throw their tooth onto the rooftop while chanting a rhyme, asking for stronger, smarter teeth in return. "Oh sun, take my old tooth and bring me a better one." The belief that the sun, or perhaps the birds, will carry the wish upward, where something kind is always listening. In ancient Egypt, baby teeth were sometimes buried with ritual offerings, especially if the child had died young. The teeth were thought to guard the child's spirit, protecting it in the next life, something small to carry with them through eternity. In Mongolia, the lost tooth might be wrapped in bread and fed to a dog. Why? Because a dog's teeth are strong and loyal. By giving the tooth to the animal, the child hopes to inherit the same traits. If no dog is nearby, the tooth may be hidden underground, where it cannot be used for bad luck or curses. In South Africa, children might place their tooth in a slipper instead of under a pillow. In Japan, upper teeth are thrown straight down into the dirt and lower teeth up onto the roof, so that the new ones grow straight and strong. Direction matters. The path of the tooth sets the path for what follows. Even in medieval Europe, people treated baby teeth with care and caution. A discarded tooth, if found by the wrong person, could be used in witchcraft. Mothers were advised to burn or bury them, preferably near the home, to keep the child safe. A tiny piece of bone became a vessel of worry or protection. So imagine, for a moment, waking in a world where every lost tooth was a sacred exchange. Not trash, not routine, but a ritual. You wouldn't just toss it in the bin. You might look up, or dig a small hole, or place it gently in a shoe. You might whisper something no one taught you, but everyone seems to know, because in the eyes of history, baby teeth were never small things. They were promises, they were prayers, they were the first pieces of ourselves that we learned to let go, and in that release, we asked for something better. Every year, in the days leading up to Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, something unusual happens in quiet courtyards and alleyways. A rooster is chosen. It's held gently but firmly. Then, in a ritual known as kaparo, it is slowly swung in a circle over a person's head, not once, but 3 times. A prayer is whispered, and then the bird is handed over, to be donated, or, in more traditional settings, sacrificed. At first glance, it might seem strange, ancient, even unsettling. But for centuries, this ritual has carried deep symbolic meaning for many Jewish communities. The word kaparo comes from a root meaning atonement or covering. The ritual is not about the rooster itself. It's about what it represents: a vessel for the mistakes, sins, and burdens of the person holding it. By circling the bird overhead, one symbolically transfers their guilt, their regrets, their fears. The words spoken are quiet, but powerful. This is my exchange. This is my substitute. This is my atonement. This rooster shall go to its death, and I shall go on to a good, long life. In that moment, the rooster becomes more than an animal. It becomes a stand-in. It carries the weight of what cannot be seen: failures, flaws, forgotten misdeeds. It is not magic. It is metaphor, and yet, in the soft morning air, as the bird flaps its wings and the shadows stretch long on stone, it feels like something deeper, something ancient, a conversation between the living and the divine, carried out not in thunder, but in whispers. In some communities, the rooster is not killed, but donated, given to a poor family as an act of charity. In others, it is ritually slaughtered, its meat used for food. Either way, the transfer is complete. What matters most is the intent, the letting go. And while this practice is still observed by some today, it is not universal. Many Jewish people have replaced the rooster with money, wrapped in a white cloth, spun 3 times overhead, before being donated to the poor. A quieter form, a gentler vessel. But the symbolism remains the same. Letting go, starting again. But imagine now that you are living long ago, in a medieval Jewish village, just before the holiest day of the year. You are tired, you are worried. You have spoken harshly, forgotten promises, missed chances to be kind. You wake early. Outside, the sun is barely up, the rooster is waiting. It is not a punishment, it is a mirror, and when it circles above your head, feathers brushing the air, something lifts. Not because the bird is magic, but because you are finally ready to let go. In a world without therapists, without written apologies, without digital confessions, this small act speaks for you. 3 slow circles, a quiet prayer, and the burden feels just a little lighter. Because sometimes, even the soul needs a ritual, and sometimes it takes a rooster to help us begin again. In our world, fire is temporary. A flick of a match, a short-lived candle, a flame that dies when the lights come on. But in ancient times, there were fires that were never meant to go out. In Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, fire is sacred. It is not simply a tool or a symbol. It is truth. It is purity. It is divine order made visible. And in the temples of this ancient faith, flames were tended with quiet reverence, not for hours, not for days, but for centuries. These were the eternal fires, carefully guarded, constantly fed, watched day and night by priests whose job was not to preach, but to preserve. The flame represented Asha, the cosmic principle of truth, justice, and light. As long as the fire lived, the world remained in balance. If the fire went out, that balance could break. The most sacred of these was the Atash Beram, or fire of victory. It wasn't just lit from a single spark. It was created by combining flames from 16 different sources, each with ritual significance. A blacksmith's forge, a baker's oven, a king's hearth. Each fire was purified through complex ceremonies before being joined into one. Once lit, the Atash Beram was meant to burn forever, and some of them nearly did. One flame in Yazd, Iran, is said to have burned for more than 1,500 years. Through invasions, earthquakes, and regimes, the fire remained, quiet, undisturbed, alive. In these temples, the fire is kept behind glass, protected from breath, wind, and impurity. Only trained priests may approach it. They wear masks to avoid contaminating it with even a whisper. They bring offerings, sandalwood, incense, and tend the flame as one might tend a heartbeat, not loudly, not with spectacle, but with steady hands and silent prayers. To the outside world, it might look like ritual, routine, repetition. But to believers, it is something deeper, a conversation with creation itself. Because fire, in this belief, is not just fire. It is the light that shows the way, the warmth that holds the soul, the reminder that something pure can survive the centuries. Now imagine living in a time when the world outside is changing. Empires rise and fall, kings die, roads vanish. But inside a quiet temple, there is a room that never sleeps. A room where the flame has not been forgotten. You walk inside. The air smells of cedar and thyme. And there it is, the fire, still burning. It has seen more than you ever will. It has survived, when memory has not. And somehow, it still flickers, still listens. You do not speak. You only watch. Because in a world full of chaos, war, and forgetting, this flame remembers. And you realize something simple, something sacred. Not all light fades. Not all warmth dies. Some fires were never meant to end. In the medieval world, fear didn't always come from swords or storms. Sometimes it came from something far softer. Something you barely noticed as it slipped away. A strand of hair. To people in the Middle Ages, hair wasn't just something that grew, fell, or tangled. It was part of your soul, a living extension of the self. And once it left your body, it could be used by others, for things you might not want to imagine. Witches, it was believed, could use hair to cast spells. All they needed was a single strand. Found on a pillow. Clinging to a comb. Hidden in the folds of clothing. With it, they could tie knots in your fate, twist your mind, or bring you slow misfortune. In folk tales, they would boil hair in secret pots, whisper curses into the steam, and send their intentions out into the world like smoke. If you felt weak, unlucky, or suddenly sick, people whispered, you might be under a hair-bound spell. So, people became careful. After brushing, women would collect fallen hair. Some burned it, others buried it in sacred ground or locked it away in small silver boxes. Letting it fall into the wrong hands was simply too dangerous. Even lovers took hair seriously. A lock of hair tied with ribbon could symbolize devotion. But in the wrong context, it became something darker. A charm, to bind someone's heart, or to never let them leave. Children were taught, never throw your hair away carelessly, never leave it in the wind, because what was once yours could be turned against you. Some households had quiet rituals. Burn the week's hair in the fire every Sunday. Speak no words while doing it. Just let the smoke rise, carrying any unwanted energy away. There were stories of people finding their own hair hidden in doorways, sewn into cushions, or buried in gardens, signs that someone had tried to control them or wished them harm. Hair was not just hair. It was identity. It was vulnerability. And if you laughed off these old fears, well, you might start to feel things you couldn't explain. A shadow in the corner, a heaviness in your limbs, a dream that repeats too often. Because in the medieval world, magic didn't need thunder or blood. Sometimes, it only needed something you didn't even realize you'd lost. A single strand, a silent whisper, a slow unraveling. So next time a hair falls to the floor and you're tempted to ignore it, imagine living in a time when that hair still had eyes, still had power, still had a name, and you might be more careful where it goes. To rule is to sit above others. But in some cultures, the power of the throne didn't come only from the ruler who sat upon it. It came from what was buried underneath. In the imperial courts of ancient China, and later in the royal palaces of Vietnam, it was believed that the foundations of a throne mattered just as much as the crown above. Beneath the carved wood and golden silk, beneath the platform or polished stone, something ancient sometimes waited, something with teeth. Tiger teeth, dragon teeth, fangs of myth and beast. These were no random decorations. They were placed with intention, as spiritual anchors, guardians of the realm, not made of flesh, but of legend. In Chinese geomancy, also known as feng shui, the energy of a space could influence fate, health, power. The throne, as the seat of the sovereign, had to be aligned perfectly. But even more than alignment, it needed protection. The idea was simple. If enemies could hide curses beneath a ruler's seat, then the throne itself must be fortified, not with stone, but with symbol. Tiger fangs were feared and respected. In folklore, the tiger was the king of beasts, ruler of the mountains, embodiment of ferocity. Its tooth, even in death, held spiritual weight. Placing tiger teeth beneath a throne was thought to deter betrayal, frighten hidden spirits, and silence dissent. No demon, no curse, no ill wish could rise through that floor. But tigers were not alone. The dragon, that long and sacred figure of East Asian myth, also played its role. Unlike the fire-breathing monsters of European tales, the Asian dragon is wise, noble, cosmic. Its teeth, when carved from jade or crafted in gold, became symbols of heavenly mandate. A throne resting on dragon fangs was more than furniture. It was a bridge between earth and sky. Some thrones were said to contain entire talismanic bundles, a combination of sacred herbs, bones, incantations, and creature parts. These were sealed beneath the stone slabs, placed during the palace's construction. No one was to disturb them. They belonged to the throne. They were part of the throne. This wasn't superstition. It was strategy. Because even the most powerful emperors feared the unseen. Even the wisest rulers guarded against forces they could not name. Imagine being a craftsman in the 13th century, tasked with building a royal platform. You are not told only to shape wood or polish jade. You are told where to hide the fang. You are told what prayer to speak as you bury it. You do not ask why, because to question is to invite attention, and the teeth beneath the throne should be left alone. And so the ruler ascends. He sits high, robed in silk, surrounded by courtiers and guards. But underneath him, below the sandals, the silk, the gold, is a mouth, a memory. A warning to anything that rises from the shadows. A tiger's rage, a dragon's roar, waiting, watching, silent, because in that time, power did not rest on people alone. It rested on belief, on symbols, on bones. And if you were to sit on such a throne without reverence, if you laughed at the stories, if you thought teeth were just teeth, you might find the ground beneath you wasn't as empty as it seemed. Long before the ticking of gears and the chiming of bells, time moved with the voice of a bird. In the small, frost-covered villages of northern Europe, where winters were long and nights could stretch endlessly, the rooster was more than a farm animal. It was a clock, a sentinel, a symbol. Its crow wasn't just a signal that morning had come. It was a boundary, a line between safety and something else. In Old Norse belief, the gall of the rooster carried spiritual weight. According to the myths of the poetic Edda, 3 roosters crow to signal the beginning of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. 1 red rooster in the underworld, 1 golden in the heavens, and 1 among the mortals. To the Norse mind, the rooster had a foot in all realms, earth, sky, and shadow. But outside the sagas, even in daily life, the rooster was treated with quiet reverence. Villagers believed that its crowing kept evil at bay. As long as the rooster sang each morning, the world stayed in balance. The dead stayed quiet. The spirits stayed distant. A rooster that failed to crow, especially one that died suddenly, was a sign, an omen. People would stop and listen, not for the sound, but for the absence of it. In a village built on rhythm, of sun, seasons, seed and song, silence was a rupture. They believed that a rooster's call was not just noise, but a spiritual reset. Each crow scattered the remnants of the night, not just darkness, but all that wandered with it, ghosts, trolls, things unnamed. Children were told that when the rooster crows, the bad dreams leave the house. Elders believed that if you heard 3 crows before sunrise, you would be protected for the day. And in some regions, a white rooster was considered especially holy, said to glow in moonlight and speak to angels. Roosters were often buried with care, sometimes under the threshold of a home or near the barn, so their spirits could continue to guard the household. Some families carved roosters onto weather vanes, not as decoration, but as watchers of the sky, guardians against storm and spirit. And still, the belief remained. As long as the rooster crowed, you were safe. Now imagine this. You live in a wooden cabin, tucked between pine trees and snowdrifts. It is winter. The sun sleeps long. You wake not to a clock, but to a sound you know deep in your bones. 1 crow, then 2, then 3. You listen, you count, you exhale. The day has begun. The night is gone. The spirits have heard the call, and they have left. But what if there is no sound? What if you wake to silence? No crow, no rustle, just stillness. You step outside. The rooster lies quiet, eyes closed, breathless in the frost. You do not speak. You gather your family. You light a candle, because the clock has stopped, because something has been let in. And in that world, where belief held more weight than proof, you didn't need to see what walked the shadows. You only needed to hear what didn't crow. In the West, a fireplace is often seen as a place of warmth. In East Asia, the hearth is far more than a source of heat or a place to cook. It is a threshold, a sacred center, a space where the living and the dead quietly meet. In many traditional East Asian households, from Vietnam to China to Korea, the kitchen hearth was not just where meals were made. It was where the spirit of the home lived, and more importantly, it was where the ancestors watched. It was believed that within the gentle flames, within the smoke rising to the rafters, the presence of those who came before still lingered, not in a ghostly way, not to frighten, but to protect, to witness, to remind. In Vietnam, the Ong Tao, the kitchen god, was said to dwell in the hearth, quietly observing the family's behavior throughout the year. Then, at the end of the lunar year, he would ascend to the heavens, riding on the back of a carp, to report everything to the Jade Emperor. Because of this, families cleaned the hearth before the new year. They burned offerings, incense, paper clothing, miniature horses, and they placed sweet syrup on the statue's mouth, hoping he would speak only kind words about the household. In China, similar traditions echo through time. The Zhaojun, or kitchen lord, watches silently, recording the kindness and cruelty of the family. Each pot placed over fire, each bowl stirred in steam, passes beneath his gaze. The hearth was not just stone and ash, it was spiritual real estate, and so, the fire was never treated carelessly. Letting the hearth go cold, especially at night, was once seen as a sign of disrespect. A sign that you had forgotten the roots of your house. It was said that if the fire died suddenly, it could anger the ancestors, or worse, allow unwelcome spirits to slip in. In some homes, even the ashes were treated with care, not swept away too soon, not thrown out randomly, because they were not trash, they were traces of prayer. When someone passed away, their memory was often anchored in the home through fire. A bowl of rice, a cup of tea, a small flame flickering quietly nearby. And when the family gathered for meals, there was often a moment of silence, not for reflection, but for presence, because they believed the ancestors were still there, still listening, still part of the warmth that rose from the pot. Now imagine living in such a home. You wake early, before the birds. You kneel by the hearth and coax the coals back to life. You don't speak loudly. You don't rush. You feed the fire gently, like feeding an old friend. You bow once, maybe twice. Because in this place, you are never truly alone. Your grandparents, your great-grandparents, those who tilled the land, carried water, gave birth, endured famine, they are here. Not in portraits, not in memories, but in the living breath of the flame. And if you were to spit in the fire, if you let it die without care, you would not be punished. But something would feel distant. Because in this part of the world, a kitchen isn't just a room. It's a shrine, a womb of fire. And in that fire, your entire lineage still lives. Across cultures and centuries, what we throw away today. Hair, teeth, firewood, the crow of a rooster, was once sacred, once watched, once feared. Because in the old world, the smallest things were often the most powerful. A fallen tooth carried a child's luck. A wisp of hair could hold a curse or a blessing. A rooster's voice kept the shadows at bay. A kitchen fire was the beating heart of an entire lineage. These were not just beliefs, they were systems of meaning. Quiet rituals that made sense of a world filled with mystery, loss, and hope. And perhaps that's what made them last so long. They gave people something to hold on to when nothing else made sense. So if you feel like today's world is too fast, too loud, too disconnected, remember that once someone knelt in silence to thank their tangled hair. Once someone lit a fire not just for warmth, but to keep their ancestors close. And in that soft glow, in that ancient hush, you might find that nothing was ever truly small. Not to the ones who believed, and not to the ones who remembered,